Before we are starting, and I'd like to introduce this Melissa's show and also the other two galleries. One gallery is showing Nye Fairbanks' work. Nye is going to have a museum exhibition soon, next Saturday. Openings next Saturday, 5 to 7. So go to museum next Saturday. Yeah, and then the other gallery is my work. So enjoy.
What's your name?
Huh?
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Sai Shi. Yeah, I'm from China. And I lived in Vermont. Lived in US for a long time. So I would say US is my home. And okay, so I'll introduce Melissa and Amy. Well, we are so grateful to have Melissa's work here. Melissa is a New York-based artist and now living in southern Vermont. And she received numerous awards, including Pollock Krasner and also New York Foundation of Art. And her work is showing in the TV, in the film, and performance. And Amy Beecher we know Amy for a long time, since when she was in Marlboro College. Amy studied in Yale University, Brown University, and her work is collected by the Museum of Modern Art. And Amy now is a professor in Emerson. So we are so grateful to have both of them in the same time. They have a long time relation going way back. So maybe they can share their friendship and art making experiences. And thank you for coming.
Great. Welcome. It's such a pleasure to be here and to be in dialogue with Melissa, with whom I've been in dialogue for around 25 years, because Melissa is a friend and an inspiration, and was also my middle school art teacher.
That's true.
Lucky me.
And, lucky me.
Well, it's a really wonderful full circle opportunity.
Yeah, that's great.
So I thought we'd start by talking about the forest.
Okay.
A huge theme in this work, and the titles of the work. Do you want to talk about how the forest became an inspiration for you?
Sure. I'm very affected by my environment. So, Ari and I, my husband and I, got this property, this house up here about 7 years ago, and it's really, compared to living in New York City, it's in the environment, it's in nature, it's surrounded by forest, and all of that. I guess just being a visual person, it just comes in, and it sinks in and walks in the woods and seeing the changes with nature and piles of branches and dried grass and all of that becomes really exciting to me from a textural point of view and a psychological point of view. So a lot of this obviously sort of sprang from that, what's going on here. Mm-hmm. So.
I had a similar experience moving from New York City to teach at Marlborough College, and going on some of my first walks in the woods, I was just struck by the scale of everything.
Right.
And and actually it felt kind of uncanny and creepy, and it started to make its way into my psyche, and then of course into my approach to my own work too.
Yeah. Actually,
so
the word creepy, this isn't always fun, being in the forest, and I do have fears, when I walk. My husband knows, I worry about bears and I make noise and, I'm like, should we go that way? I don't know if we should do that. There might be bears up there. So, it's beautiful. It's awe-inspiring.
Right.
It's kind of what it is,
Yeah.
and I really respect it. I don't feel like, oh, it's such a pretty place to be. I mean, it is, but it's scary.
Yeah. Awe is a good word.
Yeah, awe.
I think awe is a perfect word.
Yeah. And it could be awe, awe and awe.
So maybe let's talk about what's in the gallery and
Okay.
your approach, we'll start by talking about your approach to making things in general, and then we'll talk about making these things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, making things in general, I rarely have a clear concept of what it is that I want to make, which might be surprising to some people, but I basically start with an investigation of materials. I mean, there's stuff behind that, obviously psychological stuff and emotional stuff behind it and visual stuff behind it, but a lot of it is just like, let me start playing around with materials. Let me see what starts happening. So pretty much everything in this show, except for a couple pieces in the other room, are done with wax and melted wax and cold wax. And what I tend to do is I play around with. I have what's called a hot palette, and it's a big box that's heated with light bulbs, and it has a piece of anodized aluminum on top, and you can melt wax on it. And I just start playing around. So that's how a lot of these started, just making like monoprints, then seeing what do I have and start piecing them together. Like things, in particular, this piece right behind you was actually a big sprawling wall piece at one time because I was just experimenting with matching pieces up and seeing what would happen. And then I just decided I needed to kind of, bring it in more. So that's sort of a general, answer to that question of how I start things. So
I envision your studio. I haven't been ever. Looking forward to going someday. But I envision a lot of piles of stuff.
Yeah.
And sort of sifting your way through this accumulation of stuff. It seems very active, and the work has that energy too. Mm-hmm. One of the first things I noticed in this show is the relationship between the pieces, as if they all kind of got made in the same chaos.
Yeah.
One of my favorite works in the show is in this back corner here, and it's, I was saying to Melissa, it has such a strong relationship between the rocks that are in this painting to the right, if you're in my orientation, and you answered, well, yeah, that's the paper that I was painting the rocks on. And then the rocks were actually made on this piece of paper that then became, a work of art in itself.
Right.
So
right.
very active, kind of iterative process then.
Right. And the rocks are actually made out of clay.
Right,
So,
sorry. They're clay
but that's
rocks.
okay. They're rocks. That's what they're sort of representing. Yeah. So when Amy was here last week with me, and she's like, "This one, it's like an imprint of what's going on over in that one." And I'm like, "Yeah, it is. I mean, it kind of really is." And I wasn't expecting it to be something, but to me, it spoke to me when I took the rocks off after, because it was there to catch the paint, so it didn't go all over the place. And then I coated it with wax, and it kind of gives it more of a skin feel, like a whole object feel. So yeah, that's kind of how I work. It's spontaneous, and I don't always know what's going to happen. So
You just talked about what happens with the wax when you coat something with it, but it seems like obviously wax is really primary in your work. One of the things that I noticed when I was looking at the surfaces of your work is that the wax almost suspends stuff in it, and it creates a sense of really interesting depth. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about other types of materials that make their way into your work and how you approach the surface of your work too.
that's a good question. Yeah. No, I'm very intrigued by the wax, and it's called encaustic. So I know we have a lot of artists in the room, so you might be familiar with that. But it's a beeswax with damar resin mixed in it, and the resin is put in to help make it permanent and archival. Although wax is archival pretty much on its own, but it firms it up because regular beeswax would be too, soft.
Okay.
So I generally, not always, but I use encaustic medium without any pigment in it frequently. Not with everything, but pretty frequently. And that, when I do that, it allows me to create with a very, very thin surface the feeling of depth, because I can put things behind it and then put a layer of wax and then put another thing behind it. And it's painted on and it's heated up and it's fused to whatever it is I'm working on. So before you know it, it all becomes one, even though it has that feeling of depth behind it.
Oh,
So,
I see.
Yeah.
So there's, and suspended in the wax, I know we talked about graphite, indigo, other
Yes.
types of raw materials too?
In these particular pieces, graphite, charcoal, some ash. I have wood ash that I've used that is like a nice gray tone. That's just taken from our wood burning stove. I use that. And then the natural materials that were added on top of. So,
Right.
mostly powdered pigments of varying, kinds, like marble dust is in it, which is not a pigment, but it adds to the texture of the surface. So.
It's really, I guess Melissa said there's a lot of artists in the room. I don't know a lot of people here, but it's, I think we can all appreciate it's hard to suspend pigment in wax. It's not as easy as it sounds. And actually this morning I had bought some finger paint for my son, and it was like turmeric and beet powder that you're supposed to mix with water.
Oh, okay.
And I said, we're gonna make paint. And we put it into the water, and he was like, this isn't paint.
It probably sank, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
It's a really tough thing to try to really make marks with
Right.
and have a fluency with.
Right.
to
Well,
develop that.
you need water is great for certain pigments, but stuff that like turmeric and what was the other thing you said you used?
And beet powder.
Yeah, it's probably too heavy for water.
Yeah.
But if it had a thicker consistency, like a gum arabic or something like that, it probably would work.
So you're an artist and a chemist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and then you can make your own paint with that.
Well, when he gets older, we'll start mixing it up.
Yeah.
We should talk about what's in the room a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
too. So there's different types of things here, right? There's these images that feel kind of like paintings. They're bigger. They have, edges. And then these smaller notes, field notes, interspersed.
Right.
Can you talk about how you think about the different types of images in the room? Is there a hierarchy?
Yeah, good question. The large pieces were all created before the little field note pieces. And actually, I had a show in New York last spring, and the majority of the work that you see, the big pieces, were in that show. And I called that show Understory, which had to do with, the forest floor and under the canopy and all that. And then when Cy invited me to have a show here, I knew I wanted to bring this to Vermont because it was created in Vermont. And but I wanted to add something more to it, and I wasn't sure what. And I got this concept of like, okay, I'm kind of showing environmental things, but I'm not really focusing on who lives there. So that's where the little field note idea came to me. And originally I was just gonna like literally just do little drawings on paper and tack them up on the wall, not in this room. I was gonna actually put them all in the little room over there. And then again, you know, looking through my studio, I found like a couple of discarded pieces of heavy paper I had prepared with various things, you know, like marble dust and graphite and whatever. They were kind of interesting surfaces, and they were like haunting me for months, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them. And I finally decided I'm going to cut them up and do these little drawings on there. And then I thought, I mean, yeah, I could do the drawings, but I feel like there's like a history of like nature illustrations that really is intriguing to me. So I actually started looking at public domain images of wildlife, of specific, you know, creatures that I know live in the wildlife up here in Vermont, and that's where the images came from. And I then used, well, I'm kind of going into my process, so let me just finish with why they're in this room. So I was going to put them in that room, and then I had this thing at night, like whenever I'm preparing for a show, I like can't sleep, and I was like, no, don't put them in that room. Put them in the same room with the big pieces. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. It's not going to look good. It's going to look too crowded. I shouldn't do that. But I'm like, no, try it. So I had this idea. I'm going to put them like they're connecting the dots, so to speak. You know, they're like a story that's being told. And I said, I'm just going to do it. I can always take it down if it looks terrible. And so I put them up when I was mounting the show. And I was like, okay, I think they look really nice. And then I was like, oh, I want the name of what they are there, and I'm going to write it right on the wall. No, don't write it on the wall. No, write it on the wall. So I finally was like, I'm just going to write it on the wall. If it looks bad, I can paint over it. So I did it. And I love it. It's like little notations. And I'm very happy that I listened to my good angel, not my bad angel, you know. I was making decisions.
And to me, it really honors your process more to have all of these things next to each other and kind of running into each other, considering how you describe working, which is like it all comes from the same studio chaos. And I like moving from these sort of big, open, less sort of ambiguous images to something that feels really concrete and has a name, and then like unnameable, open, and then very nameable, specific.
Right.
And that becomes like a rhythm of how you interpret the work too in the gallery space.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I can see that. Because like for me, I know these look totally abstract, but I'm like, no, this is like the tangle of, you know, vines on the tree and the roots in the ground, and oh yeah, no, that's the tree branches I'm looking at up in the sky, and oh, that's the water thawing. So I see them as being something. You know, I don't mean that when they're abstract they're not, but you know, I see them as like an actual thing. So it's interesting because they are kind of abstract. I mean, they're sort of definite, but they're abstract as well. So.
Yeah. I just thought of this, but I once took a trip to Spain to where Salvador Dali lived, and it was like part of like a big trip, and I was really reluctant to go. And you've probably seen Dali's paintings and the way the trees look, and they kind of look, you know, pretty groovy and weird and not real. And we arrived at his home, and the trees kind of looked like that. It's like, oh, so what we see as artists, we're kind of like, this is exactly what I see. I'm just painting what I know,
Right.
But you know, it's very, it's specific to our lived experiences in a certain place.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, you know, obviously I don't see that, but that's how it gets processed, you know. And so like with this particular piece, these are dried lily leaves. And we have dried daylilies around the property, and Ari at the end of the season starts cleaning up, and I'm like, don't throw that out. You know, I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I was like, save it. So I had a bag of it, and when I was working on that piece, which was, I think I mentioned, was a sprawling wall piece initially. And then when I mounted it on here, I'm like, I know what I'm going to do. It was like, get the daily leaves. And that's when I just felt like, it works.
Wow, so a lot of work gets finished in here, I guess.
Well, I did that in the studio initially.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I did do it in the studio. And then the same thing with the piece on the back wall that has the branches. It was the same kind of a, like, don't throw those out. I need those branches, stuff that's falling out of the trees. So.
You know what just struck me, like kind of looking around this room and then getting a glance of the room next door? You were talking about the canopy of the forest, what's under, what's outside, and this room is very dark. It feels like we're under the canopy, and that room has a sort of light airiness to it. Do you think about the space of the forest too, not just the feeling of yourself in the forest, but does that come into your work, these sort of spatial relationships?
I think so, whether I'm aware of it or not. I mean, I tend to work very dark. I don't know why. I'm drawn to darkness. I don't know why. Like the piece on that wall, I did that after like a night when I couldn't sleep and looking out the window, and it was actually on the solstice, and it was one of those. It was the longest night, and it was dark, but like the stars were like these bright hot ink spots, and it was like an incredible night. And the next day, I started working on that, which went through a lot of iterations. Also, like this one, it was over the wall, and then I brought it down. And then the one back there also, it was inspired by the night sky because there's spots of silverleaf on there that, sort of those little punctuation marks, in the sky. So
that was something that struck me about the work too, spending a little time in the gallery, was that a lot of the surfaces really respond to just the time of day and the silverleaf, even just like the way light hits the wax really changes over time. I had arrived early, an hour early. And
were you there that?
Yeah, I was there that early. But I wanted to spend some time in the gallery, and also I think I got it wrong on my calendar. But I was there, and that was really great to have that, just what happens over an hour in this space. And things really changed. I went to visit Cy and then came back in, and all of a sudden the light was hitting this pool pond piece in a very different way, and the rings just like popped off of the surface at me.
Yeah, the silverleaf does that. Like even if it's interesting because sometimes in lower light it pops out even more. And I don't know what, like if these lights were off, you'd be probably seeing the ovals of silverleaf even more than they show up now. Although they show up pretty well on the small dark piece, I guess because it's so dark. But yeah, it's true. And over time too, that'll probably patina a bit also, the silver. And
really?
Well, it's pretty preserved with the wax, but it may tarnish, which is fine with me. I like that it'll change.
Yeah. Well, it feels like there's like a oneness with your own experiences and in the forest and the way that the work lives in a space. And I guess I do have that question too. Like, what happens over time to these piles of brush?
I don't know yet. I mean,
we'll find out, right?
Yeah, I'm sure it'll break down. And if it's a piece that remains with me and I want to show it again, I might have to just collect more lily leaves, or maybe something else will come of it. I don't know. But I can see even already, like as it sits, it starts to shift and move down a little bit. So, but that's okay. What's that?
So do we all.
Yeah, gravity. We're all victims of it now. Oh well.
So, what does your studio look like now? Sort of the post-show studio.
It's pretty empty right now. The walls are empty because most of this was hanging up in there. I still have boxes of stuff that's just waiting to be sorted through, and we'll see where it goes. I haven't had a lot of time to get into the studio in the last few months, but I'm looking forward to it because I want to continue kind of building on this. It's kind of an investigation, just to see where it can go, and the little pieces too. I'm not sure if I'll continue doing those, but, you know, who knows? I don't know. Maybe turn them into, like, do like a book, sculptural book format or something. I'm starting feeling like I want to work a little more dimensional, three-dimensional. So, I don't know. We'll see.
You can definitely see that in this show. That things are kind of coming off the wall and it's becoming an installation.
I'm feeling that sort of, you know, stuff in me. It's curiosity and maybe taking the wax to a different place than I've taken it, maybe carving into it more, doing more sculptural stuff. So we'll see. I'm not sure yet. So these things are percolating.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
Do you want to open it up?
Yeah, definitely. I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you. It's great.
Oh yeah, it's so fun.
It makes it a lot easier to talk about the work. But yeah, absolutely. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. Bob.
When you're talking about these pieces, do these larger pieces have titles?
Yes. Yes.
Could you mention the title?
I will.
When you're talking about the piece?
Yeah, so the piece behind you is called Longest Night. You know, it's interesting because when I had the show in New York, you know, it's sort of a trend in New York, don't put labels on the wall, you know, just put it on a sheet, put a number, and you got to walk around. But the titles, which I'll tell you pretty much all of them, they're kind of like poetry to me. So I said, I think the title should be there.
Yes.
So what I did was I printed them on clear labels in a very, very light gray. And under each one, it was almost like a whisper, just a little, you could see the title. And I felt it was really important that people look at it but could read and see what it is. So thank you for asking about that. So that one's called Early Thaw, the big blue one. This is called Bramble. This is Understory. This is called The Pond with a subtitle in parentheses, Migration. And the one that's like the skin with the newsprint is Notations. The one on the back wall is You Are Here, and then in parentheses, Cosmic Dust. And then on the wall facing it is Undergirding. So that's what's in this room. Oh, and the one over the table where the postcards are is called Lunar Calendar, the one with the little stones in it. Oh, and the full moon, the one over the other table. So,
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Tina. Hi.
Hi. Just popped in from Mexico.
Yeah, welcome back.
Myself. But I've been recently struck by the sense of reverence, and my question is, was the nature, the climate crisis of nature, it gives us, to me, a sense of there's more than the horror. It's also a sense of reverence.
Yes, I mean,
Power
yeah.
of what feels like life. And then, thank you, I bought the one with the bear. I was so struck. Because we hit a bear the other day and it really ripped me apart.
Oh, wow.
And here's these animals in this environment, and you have evoked, again, with a sense of reverence. It's almost like we need that, no matter what's going on.
Thank you, yeah.
I do want to say that I could see whether you knew it or not, you were telling us there's so much power and reverence, and we're in it.
Well, thank you. That's a very nice perspective. And yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, well, there is a reverence, obviously, you know, to the environment. And then the small pieces with the animals, you know, these are super fragile, these pieces. You know, I had to be really careful when I handled them, and I ended up putting some like stronger board on the back to reinforce them when I was figuring out how am I going to hang them. But I think that fragility is important to keep in mind, and it's a big part of what I was thinking about when I was creating these also. So yeah, you could call it reverence. Oh, was that a? There you go. See the lights out, and you can see the glowing in real time. There it is. Yes.
I'm curious, did you grow up in the city in an urban environment?
No.
And then when you came here, this is what resulted?
No, actually, I was born in Brooklyn, or in New York, lived in Brooklyn until I was 2, and then my family moved to northern New Jersey, which at the time was pretty rural. So actually my childhood from like 2 to 18, I was in an environment, I mean, it was suburban, but there were farmlands and orchards and woods and all that stuff. So yeah, actually I spent a lot of time as a kid, walking barefoot through the woods and that sort of thing. So, and then when I was 18 and ready to go off to school, and I moved into New York City to go to the School of Visual Arts, and I ended up living there for 40 years. Mm-hmm. So I was in a obviously very urban environment.
Because you mentioned the business of feeling a fear of being in nature.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the fear is more like what we were saying, like an awesome kind of a feeling, But yeah, I do sometimes feel afraid.
Well, you said, the there.
You're right.
That's a fear.
Yes.
It's a pretty sunset.
Yeah.
I
have
no
both.
Threat.
Yeah.
There's no implied threat, no possible threat.
Right.
I mean, how about getting lost in the woods is a threat?
Right.
Just that alone.
Yeah.
Do you have those?
I mean,
thoughts
I generally.
You stick on the trail?
I stick on the trail. I mean, there's been occasions, like more when I was younger. I mean, I used to walk, like where I lived, there was this huge woods that led to like a hangout place, where I'd hang out with my friends. And like even at night, I'd walk through there by myself. Like who does that? Nobody would do that nowadays, I'm sure. I didn't have that same fear because it was a suburban environment. So I was like, who knows? There could have been wildlife that wouldn't be fun to meet, but I never thought of it.
Yeah.
Where up here, I'm more like, I see the tracks in the snow. I know who's out there. So it's not like I'm shivering, shaking, scared, but I do get a little nervous.
Apprehensive.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Yeah.
Kind of term.
Yeah.
So in your progression in art, when you went to school and everything, you were probably looking at other art and responding to it.
Mm-hmm.
When did you make the transition from doing that, following that path, to finding nature and finding your techniques to express what you're seeing and thinking, looking at?
So you're saying the artists that maybe influenced me?
Well, your progression, how
Mm-hmm.
the progression, what it progressed from? What was your earlier art?
Well, my earlier art as like a student in art school.
Yeah, or before.
Or before. I mean, early, I was a kid who just drew all the time. That was my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
representational?
Yeah, or representational, but from my imagination. But also,
Fantastical.
Yeah.
Realistic. Fantastic.
Yeah, or like creating my own comic strips or, whatever. And then as I got older, I very much wanted to learn real techniques when I was about 15.
Mm-hmm.
And, I really wanted to learn how to like use pencils in a way where you're like rendering, like Dürer, you know what I mean? Like you're rendering. I just wanted to know how to do that. And my mother who happens to be here. My mother was teaching yoga or something at a local Y, and she said, there's this guy who's incredible, and he teaches a drawing class that he gives private lessons. And I remember she said she approached him and asked him, his name is Dan Campanelli, and he was a real master at this kind of like rendering. And she asked him about private lessons, and when she said it's for my daughter who's 14 or 15, he's like, no, I don't teach kids or something. And she's like, no, she really is good. So he said, okay, we'll try it. And I went to him for about 3 years. And his wife was an amazing painter also. Both of them, they were like these realists, but in like like a Rembrandt, and Dürer, like that kind of level of drawing and painting. And so I took lessons from him, and it was amazing. That was transformative. And that was when, I was still in high school, and I'm like, okay, I know I am not going to a normal college. I want to go to art school. Like, I'm not like I took the SATs and I bombed, and like back then art schools didn't look at SAT scores, you know. So I knew it wouldn't matter. I just had to get a really solid portfolio together, which I did, and I applied to 2 schools, School of Visual Arts and Cooper Union, which is a real tough one because it's free. And then I got mono when I was in my senior year of high school. I was really sick, and I missed the Cooper Union test, but they let me take it at home, but I bombed because I was sick. And I got into SVA, thankfully, and that's where I ended up going, which was great, because this guy, Dan, was like, you gotta go there, because he went there. But anyway, so then I moved away from being very representational with my work, because I was going to become an illustrator. That's what I thought I would do when I went to art school. And I got introduced to sculpture, painting, printmaking, all these other modes that I hadn't really investigated. And when that happened, that's when I'm like, I don't know if I can do the illustration thing. I mean, I could have. And nobody was pressuring me, like, you're not going to make any money. You know, I didn't hear anything like that, which maybe is a good or bad thing, I don't know. But then I started working more organically. And my work that I ended up doing throughout art school, but then in my final year when, you know, you have to have a whole presentation and a studio and a show and all that, was not too different from what I'm doing here, but it was more organic, actually, not like on rectangles and squares, but it had that same sort of sculptural, organic quality to it, where I use things like porcelain and clay instead of paint, you know, on the material, like on material, and stuff would crack off, but that was okay with me. So I started moving into it then, and then for many years I didn't do large pieces like that because I was raising a child, I was teaching full time, it was a different life, and then I guess about 12. Maybe 15 years ago, I started branching out again and getting more in touch with that primal part of myself. So, I think that's what you were asking. Yeah.
I guess I was wondering too, whether there was a point where your orientation was towards humans and you switched to nature. I
mean, I think I kind of gone back and forth, because actually I had quite a few years of focusing on like the female form in my work, you know, like sort of doing like torso images and that kind of thing. So, so it was more human based, and now it's not so much. No. Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for this. You've gotten me enthused about using encaustic.
Oh, great.
I haven't much for years. Anyway, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that you don't normally know where you're going with a particular picture.
Mm-hmm.
So with a collection like this, what did you have in mind about doing this whole collection, or did you even?
Well, you know, I had a little bit of motivation, you know, a little fire under me, because I knew I had to prepare for a show last May, June.
Mm-hmm.
But it was like something I knew for, like I kept pushing the show away. Like I was supposed to have it like 4 years ago, and I'm like, oh, I'm not ready. You know, and then the pandemic hit. I'm like, oh, good, I don't have to do that. And then
This is the New York one?
yeah, and then things eased up with the pandemic, but I'm like, I can't do this. But anyway, so I finally settled on okay, you're just doing it. So I gave myself like a year to really pull things together, but I've been working on stuff prior to that. So once I knew I had a show coming up, that's when I started getting more focused because like I said, I don't really know what I'm doing sometimes, you know, like where it's going. But I started to look at the work more critically myself to figure out, okay, what's being communicated here? You know, and I also worked with other artists who helped, like in a crit group. So I'd hear feedback from other people, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. That is, you know, this or that or whatever. So I think I try to just let whatever's going on communicate to me what the story is that I'm trying to tell. And it may not be linear, because I don't think it is, but I think they're all part of the same story. You know, it starts coming together as part of the same story.
Mm-hmm.
but it sounds like it evolved over time.
Yeah, it evolves over time. And like the pieces in the other room were sort of created within the same time frame as this, but some of them are earlier. Like there's woven pieces on the wall in the other room. I don't know if people had a chance to look at them yet. And they're like kind of precursors to these bigger, which these are kind of like big collages, these pieces. They're like pieces pieced together, or like even that piece in general there specifically has a woven quality to it. And that piece was sort of a jumping off from what I was doing in the other room, which was just weaving together interesting patterns and textures and to kind of create fabric in a way. So.
Okay, thanks.
And I hope everybody gets a chance to look up close at the edges of the work, because they're almost like, they're basically like wrapped panels, and so you can see each individual piece of paper coming together in very much a collage way to create a cohesive image. You can really see the seams.
Yeah, and when I knew I wanted to mount them and sort of start looking at them more as paintings rather than just collages, but like collage paintings, I liked the wrapping around because they become more like objects also.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any other questions?
Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Sky.
I have on those edges. So, were these canvases that you wrapped around, or everything's painted on?
Yeah, these are actually they're wood panels. They're cradled wood panels. So they're birch panels, and so some of them, depending on the size of the, monotype, which is what I use as my base. Some of them actually wrap around, or some are pieces I cut from other discarded monotypes that I use to cover the edges. So
what's the distinction, say, on this piece at the very top with let's call it the sky, and then you have that edge that wraps around. Where does that edge come? Is that two different mediums? Or
yeah, it's like two different pieces of paper, or more than two. It's a few different pieces. Like you can,
So
there's like a seam here,
yeah.
and then there's if you look closely, there's seams all over. So
I don't know why the effect is very compelling.
Huh.
It's multi-dimensional.
oh, thanks. Any other questions? Do I see?
Yeah.
Yes, Tina again. Yes.
Twice. But I myself struggle with the boundaries, and then this raw energy, the power of this energy is like water. And then having the boundaries, and I thought, it is. On the one hand, the boundaries seem arbitrary. On the other hand, like for that one, you have that very sharp division between the painting and the real leaves, whatever they are.
Right.
And were you conscious? It is work, but it at the same time seems arbitrary, because those same little wiggly lines of the roots that are painted and go into the leaves, and so they could be one of a piece.
Right.
But then you have the boundaries, and I mean, in a sense, if we didn't have boundaries, we'd go insane. In this unbridled energy.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No, I hear you. I actually originally thought about having, instead of it being like, almost like it's growing out, I was like, thought of bringing it up higher, but something about it, I felt it was important to differentiate, so.
It makes it easier to read in a way, but you don't know why, but there
Yeah.
it is.
It's like that, isn't it?
I
I don't know why.
There's all these really close relationships between disparate pieces in this work, obviously to create a sense of cohesion, but I hadn't realized, I see the yellow tape in this one now, and I sort of assumed it was yellow paint because it's so close to the yellow paint that's, or not paint, but wax, painterly marks.
Right.
And so it just becomes yet another yellow mark, but with dimension, and we were talking too about this kind of quiet piece in the corner here. What is the name of that one?
Undergirding, yeah.
Undergirding
Yeah.
is it's graphite and also carbon, and it's a grid of both of those materials, and the only difference between them is really the color temperature of the powder. You
Yeah.
can see it. So it's very subtle, the difference between them, but it exists.
Yeah, which I didn't even notice until Amy pointed that out, that like the top half of that piece back there is cool, a cool gray, and the bottom is a warm gray. And I'm like, huh, that's amazing you saw that. How did you know that? Like, okay, you're right. It's two different kinds of carbon. One's graphite, one's charcoal. So the
Right.
graphite's cooler,
Right.
the charcoal's warmer.
I guess it just points to the subtlety of it. Tina was talking about the boundaries and differences between things.
Yeah.
And there's like some really big intervals, like, whoa, you know, daylilies to wax, but then there's also these really tiny, subtle intervals that really give an energy
Yeah,
to the
no,
work.
I'm glad you pointed that out, even to me. So I wasn't even aware of it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify, most of these are works on paper that you've adhered to birchboard. They're
Yes.
not straight paintings.
They're on. Everything is on paper.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Except for, like, it's a kind of paper, but like the piece we were just talking about with the cool and the warm, that's Yupo, which is like a synthetic paper. And there's a couple pieces in the other room on Duralar, which is paper, but it's synthetic paper. It's a different
It
paper.
works better with wax, probably.
No, that actually I don't use wax on that because it would kind of like warp and shrivel up from the heat. So those don't have any wax. And in the, I don't know if people saw in the front window of the gallery, there's two big panels that I worked on, which if you haven't looked at it, it's really nice. You should go take a look. What's that?
From the street.
And from the street, yeah. And those are on two like 40 by 80 inch panels of Duralar, and that's done just with acrylic paint because it's white. It's similar, like this sort of branchy. So I cut areas away and whatnot. So again, it's paper, but it's like a synthetic paper. But yeah. Any other questions? People ask great questions. Tina.
I can't help it, I do know that you taught for a long time.
Yeah.
At an arts-oriented open school.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could talk about your own relationship to your teaching experience.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's been a while. You know, I taught for almost, for over 25 years at two different schools, but the one school that I taught the most at was the Little Red Schoolhouse in Manhattan. That's where I taught Amy. And I left teaching, I guess, about 13 years ago to just really focus on my work. You know, I'm not sure how teaching comes into the work, other than just being able to hopefully talk about it somewhat clearly. You know, and also one of my big things when I was teaching, and for me also as an artist, but as a teacher, I felt it was really important to expose students to all different kinds of materials, especially things they weren't familiar with, because then they had less expectations of how it's supposed to turn out. And I thought that was really important to do that. And I mean, I hope.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking back to memories of being in your class, and of course I loved it. And one thing that was special was that there was no hierarchy of materials, and we would do clay and we'd draw into clay, and then the next week we were drawing each other in pencil, and then it would be time to go back to the clay, and now we can think about color and glazes, and I think that wasn't something that we talked about, but it was just something that we did, and I think you have such an openness and joy in exploring materials that really came into the classroom in an important way.
Yeah, and I think that I bring that to my own practice, you know, that I just love stuff. I love materials, I do, you know, and sometimes I think, maybe people won't think I'm serious because I don't just stay with the same thing all the time, but I don't care. You know, that's just what I do. This is how I work. So. Yep. So, I guess.
If everyone,
Question?
No, sorry, you go.
no.
This is a wonderful exhibition.
Oh, thank you.
And I was wondering, where are you going from here?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Amy asked me that too, and I think I do just various things that kept me out of the studio for the last few months, and I know I'm going to be getting back in very soon, and in a more focused way. I mean, I've been in without, I mean, like the little pieces, I did all these in the last few months, but the big stuff I sort of put on hold. And I'm probably just going to continue exploring what I'm doing now, you know, and just seeing what happens. And I would like to get a little more three-dimensional maybe, and maybe start using, whether it's wax or other materials, to, you know, take some of these flat ideas and make them three-dimensional. And I'm not sure what they're going to look like yet, but it's stuff I'm thinking about. So,
Thanks.
yeah, sure.
What's the newest work in the gallery?
The newest work are the small pieces,
Oh,
the
right,
field
right,
notes,
right.
yeah, and the piece in the window. So, yeah.
One quick thing, have you heard of the book Light Eaters?
I've heard of it, but I have not. Don't know.
It's fascinating about plants and intelligence, and it's well
Right.
researched, and it's. I just think you would like it.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah,
Light
Light Eaters. Yeah, yeah. And it's nonfiction though. Right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Thanks. Well, thank you, Amy.
Yeah, onward and upward.
Yeah. Thank you.
But yeah, so he really always loved it. And then my brother went, oh, they're doing my voices. Yeah.
You're an Irish fan.
I'm Irish.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, God, my father